for us to see some faces. Equally, feel free to keep it off if you don't want us to know what's going on in your background. That's fine too. Just got a few more people coming in, so we'll just give them a moment. Okay, I think we'll get started. Lily, if you just want to bring others in as they come through. Just introduce ourselves. So I recognise a lot of people on this call, which is great to see. I'm Sam Ridgewell. I think lots of us are connected on LinkedIn. Others I know from different situations as well. So it's nice to see lots of familiar faces and names on the call. Grace, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. I'm Grace Maxted. Some of you I know already because you attend some of my sessions, but I do a lot of training on the CII modules and a little bit of as well. So looking forward to getting to some tips out this afternoon.
And we've also got Tony with us today. His sound's not fantastic, so I'm going to introduce him instead. Tony runs the inquiries and the booking team at the CII. So if you go through all of your booking process and so on, it's Tony's team that are looking after you there. So he's here to help out because on remote invigilation, we still have a few question marks against some information. So he's here to just share or make sure that we can give you as much information as we can that's as correct at today's date as much as possible. As we go through, I'm just going to ask you to mute yourselves, if that's okay, just to avoid any echoing going on. So if I can get you just to put yourselves on mute. But it'd be good to hear from you throughout the session, so please do use the chat box. And what will be really useful, just so we can get a feel as to who's in the call and what kind of exams you're specifically looking for. If you could just let us know in the chat what exam you are enrolled in or what exam you're about to enroll yourself in next. So we've got that information. Excellent, thank you, Tony. Tony's just put in his details in there as well.
Okay, lots of MO5s coming up, lots of
M1, M92.
Yes, okay.
Oh, someone's got 3 on at once. Some advanced coursework going on. Lots of law. And some more advanced coursework. Excellent.
Brilliant. Okay. A good, really wide mix.
Yeah. Lots of people doing law. Okay. So let me take you in to our slides first of all. And hopefully now you can see the slides, and hopefully you can see me and ideally Grace and Tony as well. If you click above me, you've got some options there for a small box, a little box, 2 boxes or 9 boxes. It's entirely up to you what you have there, so you can alternate that just for the best fitting for yourself, so you can see as many videos and faces as you'd like to. Couple of bits just to introduce you to with Zoom. I imagine lots of you using Zoom for pub quizzes, if nothing else. But just in case you're not, a couple of things will be useful for us to have to interact with you. So firstly is the participants bar. So if you, on your toolbar, can see an option for participants, looks like this. If you can click on that one, and once you've found it, you'll see a list of everyone on the call. You'll also see a green circle, which gives you a tick and a yes. If you tick that one once you've found it, so I know a lot of you have got there. If you're struggling to find it, it might be under an option with more, with 3 dots. If you click on that, there'll be a drop down and participants will come up. If you can't see a toolbar at all, take your mouse all the way to the top, or take your mouse all the way to the bottom, and a toolbar might pop up, and then it will be off there. Alternatively, you might have a green bar, and next to that will be an option that says View Options with a drop down, and participants will come off that one. So once you've found the participants option, then if you can click yes, so I know where we are. So about half of you have got there now. And in addition to the participants one, if you can open the chat field. So the chat field, you've all found really just to make sure you've told us about your modules. But as we've gone into the slides, some of you might have dropped that one. So again, it will be in the same places, so 3 dots and more, or along the toolbar where you can access the chat box from us there as well. Okay. As we go throughout the session, please put questions into the chat box at any time. We'll stop periodically and just check in with any questions that we've got in there as well. So we're going to go through several areas today. We've got quite an ambitious lot to fit in, so hopefully we'll get through it all. And we're going to start with remote invigilation, which is where Tony's going to help us out with. So I'll just go through what we're going to be covering off. So firstly, we're going to look at remote invigilation. So essentially, how do you book your exams? How does it work? What do you need to know? Then hints and tips for multiple choice questions, coursework, and then ACII, so pathways, what modules you want to be looking at doing, for those of you that are looking a bit further ahead as to exams to complete. If we've got time, we'll do more questions at the end, but we'll probably take them during each section. So do put your questions in the chat box as we go. Okay. So, remote invigilation. So one important thing just to point out before we start talking about remote invigilation is you do actually have a choice now. You can sit your exams face-to-face in a normal environment that you might be used to, and you have an option to do them at home. So it's just worth thinking about both. Of course, in this environment we're in, there's pros and cons for both of them, and remote invigilation, I think, is likely to be the more popular option. However, if you do want to do your exam in the next few weeks, you might find you've got more options to do that if you do book your exam in an actual exam centre. So I'm going to talk you through the process for both. They're very similar to each other, so it's quite straightforward. And Tony's team have worked on some really great resources, including some videos which will be shared shortly. So Tony, once those are available, let me know and I'll post them on LinkedIn so you can see all of this for yourselves. So the first thing you want to do when you look at booking your exam is go into your MyCII. So on the CII website, you want to log into your MyCII page. And then you've got an option to redeem your exam voucher. This is the same whether you're doing it face-to-face or remote. So we're starting with the same process. You want to view that voucher, and then you get taken into your book exams, which actually takes you into a third-party website, which is the PSI booking platform. And they're being used for all of the booking process for online and exam centre exams now. At that point, you want to click schedule your exam under Test Centre. So Test Centre will take you into doing this in a traditional way. Now, of course, lots of exam centres are not open. So you've now got the option to do a bit more research to find the best way of doing it for you to meet your location, but also your dates. So when are you hoping to sit your exam? So you start off by selecting your desired country, putting in your postcode, and then your preferred month. And then you'll get a map which provides you a view of the different exam centres that are available for you at the moment. If there's no options or you're low on options, then you can widen your search. So rather than putting in your full postcode, it's worth just putting in those first few digits so you've got a full area section there, and you can broaden that a little bit more if you're low on options. You will then get a selection of dates that are available for you. So in green are all of the dates that are available. The date that I've selected here is the one in blue, so I've gone for the 3rd of August. And then you've got some options of different times available. So we've got 3 p.m. on the 3rd of August. So you would select that and that would become your booking. At this stage, you're going to get a booking confirmation on your screen. Now you need to print that out, but if you don't have a printer, just hit print screen, save a copy on a Word document or PowerPoint document, so you've still got a record of it, even without the printer. There's a really nice thing the CII are doing, at least for now, which is allowing you to change and amend your bookings as long as you do it up to 48 hours before the exam. So of course, there's a huge amount of uncertainty at the moment. So just to accommodate for that and give you a little bit of more choice and more flexibility, you can go in and update these. Just make sure you do it 48 hours before. Okay, so how about if we're going to do it for a remote exam? So essentially, it starts off with the same process. So we're going through, we're redeeming those vouchers, but this time we're going to select remote online proctored exams, so the second option here. And then we go into a page where it's just asking what country and also your time zone. So time zone, if you're in the UK, is just going to be selected as Europe. And then from there, you're going to get your available dates. Now, I know loads of dates are selected here for July, and that's not accurate. We're not looking at dates for July, just before anyone looks at those dates and thinks they're all available. But you will get lots of dates coming up, and you can see there on the time slots, there's a huge amount of flexibility on time slots being available as well. So there will be a lot of people going on to book their exams, and the CII have factored this in terms of when dates are available. But we do see that there's going to be quite a bit more supply available for you to be able to go in and get your slots. So hopefully people will be able to book their exams and we'll be able to catch up really quite quickly. So you want to pick your exam and pick your time, at which point the website is going to run a compatibility test. When we do a compatibility test, what we will be checking for with the system, it will check that you've essentially got all of the different technology that you need in order to run everything. So you'll be looking for the webcam, your microphone, but also Google Chrome and different websites that you need to have your functionality with. It will all do this automatically. So as soon as you hit this button, you'll see this image come up, and hopefully you'll have green ticks all the way down. If you have some red crosses, then it will prompt you as to what you need to do in order to get that set up so you're ready to sit the test. Again, you're going to get a confirmation, so do print that one off or save a copy. And again, you can still amend or cancel these 48 hours beforehand. So this is you booking your exam. You know where you're starting, you know where you're going in. Now, in terms of sitting the exam, as you sit your exam, we're going back into the My CII site. And you're going to go into bookings and results, and you will see your booking there. You can access that up to 15 minutes before, and you should do it 15 minutes before, because there are some security checks. So just making sure you've got enough time in there to make sure that nothing's rushed and you're able to start on time. You need to choose a room where you're not going to be interrupted. So please make sure you've got somewhere where you can stop people coming in, but also that's uncluttered and free from any background noise. Your checklist that you did when you booked and set the exam up is going to be rechecked at this stage. And you will have someone to help you with this in case anything does come up. You'll have access for all of this 15 minutes before. So you need to make sure there's no paperwork or any books or anything in the room, so that there's nothing that could be untoward. So at the point you're about to start the exam, when you log in, you're going to have an administrator who's there live with you. They're going to contact you through the chat. So they'll be available and they'll be talking to you through a chat function. And they're going to ask you to share your screen. So they'll completely be able to see everything that's going on your screen. For this, you need to make sure that you're not running on dual screens. Although if you are running on dual screens, they'll need access to both. They'll then want a 360 view of your room. So with your webcam, you'll show them around the room. You'll show them under your desk, under the laptop, absolutely everywhere where any paperwork could be. And there also needs quite a lot of security in terms of making sure things aren't in the room that they can't be sure of what they are. So for these exams, there's no food, no drink, no electronics, no notes, even if it's blank paper, and no headphones. When you start your exam up, you'll need to show them your ID. And this will be the same ID requirements as it would be on an online, an on-person exam centre. All checks will be completed at the beginning with that administrator, and they'll be typing to you and helping you with any issues that you have. They will watch and listen, and they will record the session. So if anything needs to be checked later on, it can be. Now, please make sure no one comes into the room. Okay, if anyone comes into the room, that's going to be an issue from the exam security settings. So you really do need to make sure either people are out of the house, or if you've got children, that you've got someone who's really going to make sure you're protected and we don't have these unfortunate incidents we keep seeing on TV at the moment. You will find out if you've passed immediately in the same way as when you sit the exams in an exam centre. So you'll straight away get your pass or fail. Of course, all the further details will come later on, as they normally do when you get your written learning statement. Okay. In terms of when this is going to happen, now the CII aren't able to commit 100% because they're going through lots and lots of testing, but Tony's kindly shared with us some things they're aiming for. And the aim is this is going to be done in 2 waves. Now, wave number 1, from a general insurance perspective, is going to include IF1. So IF1 being the compulsory unit for the majority of students. So that's going to be in the first booking phase. And that's going to open up early August. So the first week in August, you'll be able to book that exam. But the sit-ins will be taking place in September. The rest of the exams will be available to book from mid-August. So we commence in the 17th of August. And again, to be sat in September. These dates, to say, they can move. So they're hoping and they're working towards them. And hopefully they're going to get there because they've done so much work on this. Again, as Tony confirms it 100%, then I'll post things out on LinkedIn. So keeping an eye out if you want to be one of the first people to get in and book and get the desired slot that you're after. But the demand should be able to be met by the supply because the provider they're using is a huge global provider and they do have quite a lot of supply available for us. So if we're not connected on LinkedIn already, then let's be friends. Add me on LinkedIn and just keep an eye. I'll share this information and these dates as they come through. Now, I can see lots of you have been asking questions as we've gone, and Tony's been right on the ball with this and answering most of those. Are there any questions that we've got that haven't been answered yet, or are there any additional questions anyone wants to put in at this stage?
So just to flag one of Tony's comments, talking about everything being available by mid-September, so that's quite key. Obviously, they're staging these, so and Tony has answered all of these questions really well in terms of what you're allowed to take and what you're not. And I will address some of the other questions a bit later on in the session.
Excellent. Okay. Any more questions on remote invigilation? Chuck them in now before Tony has to leave us in the next sort of 5-10 minutes. So we can make sure he's here to help cover those off. Otherwise, I'm going to pass along to Grace now to go through hints and tips, multiple choice questions. And Tony, I'll leave you to those chat questions and we'll fill in any gaps if there are any from anything we can help with. Okay, Grace, over to you.
Brilliant, thanks Sam. So in terms of some of the stuff that I'm going to cover today, some of it will be quite obvious, but actually it's always good to have a little bit of a reminder. Some of the stuff that came up in the chat just a little bit earlier on is to do with context for advanced diploma work. So we're going to look at that a little bit later on. But what I've tried to do is split the time between the multiple choice aspect, diploma coursework and advanced diploma. So I will flag each time I'm talking about something different. In terms of all of the books, but I would say more for the multiple choice aspects, everything I get people to do in terms of when we very first start looking at a book is to look at these learning outcomes. And so those of you who have had me before are going, God, Grace, again. But seriously, I used to skip past these all the time when I was doing my exams, and they're so useful to make sure you've got the breakdown of where the marks are going to be available in terms of the number of questions in the exam. So I've stolen one here as a screenshot, so you'll be able to see this is from the FIT book, Foundation Insurance Test. And so you can start to see, depending on how many questions are actually within the examination, roughly how many are allocated to each learning outcome. And I will say as a caveat, the learning outcomes don't necessarily marry up with the chapters. So the best way to decide which chapter contains which learning outcome is to look at the very front page of that particular chapter. So just bear that in mind. Some books are really good in terms of, you know, chapter 1 will be learning outcome 1 and so on and so forth, but some tend to jump around a bit. So don't be caught out by that, thinking, oh, I've done chapter 2, so that's fine. It might be somewhere a little bit sneaky further on down the book. So just bear that in mind. So moving on, just to look at some of the other bits and pieces that will be available on that particular page. Just underneath that grid, you should see something that looks like this, which is important notes. And obviously this tells you the actual method of assessment. So in terms of the certificate books, majority of those will be what I refer to as standard multiple choice questions, whereby there is a question and you receive 4 different options in terms of answers. Some of them will vary ever so slightly. So for example, this one I've stolen from LM2, which consists of 55 standard multiple choice questions and then 4 case studies, which are little kind of scenario blocks. And then the actual question and answer is dragged from each screen. So there's 5 each question attaching to 1 case study. So just bear that in mind. And we'll talk more about those in a little bit more detail later on. I noted a lot of you were doing MO5 in your in the chat a little bit earlier. Just to flag that, it's one of the modules that actually have what we call multiple response exams. So in terms of the multiple choice aspect of that, the multiple response is basically where you'll get a question that has a number of options, and you have to tick all of the correct options to ensure that you get that mark. So it's a little bit tricky, and it's a little bit these questions that need a little bit more time to think about and to consider. But in the MO5 specimen, you'll find a little kind of practice guide, and I'll tell you where they are in a bit more detail as well later. But essentially, just don't kind of be blindsided by that. They will be kind of maybe 4 to 6 answers available. So sometimes you have to check them all depending on what the question is. And then one thing I will just say, especially since we've had this break in terms of COVID-19, the syllabus that you guys are on might be the latter syllabus. So just double check which syllabus you have. It depends, it varies from book to book whether the updates are significant or not. Sometimes they're very small updates in terms of just updating some of the websites, and sometimes there will be extra content. So if you are worried about that, then you might want to speak to your internal kind of learning development team if they're the ones that are able to purchase the new book. But in terms of this, most of the certificate books will be kind of autumn to autumn, and most of, and sometimes they're January to December, and then sometimes the multiple choice and the mixed assessment books, so diploma based books, will be from kind of summer to summer, but these vary, so just double check you've got the right syllabus. Okay, obviously any questions, Sam, do jump in if there's anything on the chat that you want to ask me as we're going. I'll crack on with just a couple of just general CII tips. So CII have a very particular way of asking questions. They have a very particular style. I have to say that the CII question writing goes through numerous hurdles to make sure that they are as clear as possible. So I promise you, they are not written to try and trip you up. They are written in such a way that hopefully it's clear that there is an answer to that particular question. So you have to kind of get in the mindset, and some of you who are at diploma level now will be quite familiar with these from certificate level, but just make sure that you're au fait with how they ask certain things. So I will go into some of the nitty-gritty of this in a second. In terms of the modules themselves, remember they've been around for a really long time, a lot of them. And so therefore, the CII are wanting to be relatively creative and innovative in asking different questions that haven't been in past previous papers. So with that in mind, just a little tip from me, if there are any kind of new sections of the book, so things that have come out recently, so I've done some examples there. SMCR, which is the Senior Manager's Certification Regime, has only been apparent for the last kind of year or so. I note, for example, in LM2, there's a real kind of talk about drones and drone insurance, and that's a kind of a hot topic at the moment as well. And I've put the little FOS sign on this particular slide because some of you might be aware that the FOS made a lot of changes in April last year. And so therefore some of the books have been updated to reflect the new awards and new kind of eligible complainants in this area. So if you've got kind of new sections of the book where you know that they're new, I would just recommend that you kind of learn those off by heart if you can, because again, some CII might pounce on those in terms of asking questions. In terms of anybody who's had me in their sessions will know that one of my tricks as well is to learn any lists of 3 and 4 items. So I've got a little bit of an example down below in this slide, but I'll go through it as well. Anytime the book is got a kind of a few bullet points, it's very nice and straightforward for the CII to kind of pick those out and ask what we call a negative question. So if you look at my example down here about the main types of commercial vehicles, they could maybe put this in as a question, and they might say, which one of these is not a commercial vehicle? And they'll take away passenger carrying vehicles and they'll put something else in, and then that will be the answer itself. So in those terms, I would just say, try and, if you can, come up with a way of remembering those items, because it's quite common that they exist as a question in the final papers. Negative questions in general, you'll know that if they're negative, if they tend to signpost them. So they'll say, which one of these is not? And normally not is in either capitals or in bold letters. And sometimes it will say cannot. And so you know that you're choosing the odd one out as opposed to something that's true. So sometimes they're a little bit tricky, so make sure you don't read those too quickly. The other words that I will just flag that aren't on the slide that I would just recommend that you pay attention to, and these are quite subjective, so some people kind of argue the point with these, but what I would say is look for things that say usually, main, minimum, often, all of these kind of little kind of words that they throw in there to basically try and put one above the rest. So just make sure that you're kind of aware of those little words that they use, just to try and gauge what they're looking for in terms of the answer. And then very finally on this particular slide, I always get by using acronyms or stories. So again, taking this construction and commercial vehicles example that I've got below, what I would do is rearrange that. So I would do the first bullet point, the third, then the second, and then I would be a bit sneaky with the fourth and actually say that that's special construction vehicles, and that's where I get my acronym gaps. And so if you're doing that with all of the things, don't be afraid to scribble it in your textbook. That's a really nice, easy way to remember these particular things. So the main types are really good for acronyms. Okay, so moving on just to look at the actual revision and how this kind of couple of tips in terms of what to go through. So if I just on to the next slide, if I could please, thank you very much. In terms of revising, I've got a little trick that I used to use, other than doing the past papers, which we'll talk about in a second, is that of an index test. And so there is something in this. So obviously you have your end of chapter questions. I wouldn't do them as I went. I would actually probably leave those until I've read the entire book. But what I used to do before, the day before an exam, maybe 2 days before an exam, is I would go through the index and I would look at every word, for example, under A, under B, and if there is one word on there that I don't recognise or I couldn't say one thing about or associate with anything, the actual physical kind of action of looking it up would actually put it into your long-term memory. And so that is a really cool thing to do at the day before, because you're just ticking off, you're just knowing that you know everything on there. I'm also a bit of a sucker, and I know Sam is as well, for a mind map and a poster. So the picture on the right, that is my bedroom in my late teens, early 20s. My wardrobe is just covered with posters and various other bits and pieces, just to try and get it into my mind. You'll see that I've color-coded a lot of them as well. So I like to believe that I have some kind of photographic memory. Thank you very much, Emma, for my for my comment. But yes, I like to believe I have some kind of photographic memory. So if you are in the exam, you can picture where it is on your wardrobe or your wall or your fridge. If you can put them around the house, provided that the people that you live with are okay with that, it always helps you to remember what's where. So I would definitely figure those out as well. From our website, empowerdevelopment.co.uk, we also have some other kind of revision packs available as well if anybody is interested. So we have some flashcards and we have a little kind of revision workbook that has some practice questions in there as well. So if you are interested in that, do let us know. Okie dokie, so I think in terms of the last couple of bits before I get to the actual exam itself, and then I will go to talk on about coursework, a couple of things that the CII, and I'm sure Tony would vouch for me if he was still on for this, the CII website is pretty tricky to navigate in some respects, and they've updated it and it's looking very sharp and very new, but sometimes it finds, people find it quite difficult to kind of find certain things on there. So each page of each module has its own page that will actually have the syllabus on there, which is essentially the learning outcomes that I showed you at the beginning. And they'll also have an exam guide. And most people, again, look over that and don't really pay any attention to it because it's titled exam guide. If it were titled what it actually is, which is a past paper, I think a lot more people would use it. So if you want to have a past paper ready and accessibly, you go onto this particular part and you can click on exam guide, scroll through some of the spiel in the first couple of pages, and then you'll get a past paper, which is pretty good to kind of work on as well. Also, in terms of unit updates, the Learning Solutions update will be really key to know if there's been any changes since you enrolled in your book. So sometimes there are midterm changes whereby, I don't know, similar the FOS awards changed or something like that, and you can find that in the unit update on the right-hand side there. And just before I do go on to the exam, just to flag as well, obviously you've got your revision mate access, which will give you practice questions galore for a lot of the chapters as well, and you can actually do that online as a quiz. So there's some key tips there. Let's talk about the exam itself. So a couple of people know this, some people don't. I'm going to talk in terms of the actual exam test centre, but obviously the system will be very similar if you are doing remote invigilation. So I'll try and flag where I think some things might be different. You are able, say for example, you are stuck on question 30 and you know that it's not going to be B or D, but it's definitely between A or C. Rather than pondering it and spending lots of time going back and forth, what you can do is right click on your mouse and strike through B and D. It's kind of like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where they eliminate them 50-50. And so when you come back to the question, you know that you've only got to choose between A and C. So a lot of people don't utilize that tool, but that is something that you can do. Equally, you are able to flag papers or flag kind of questions. But I would suggest don't flag too many. Some people end up flagging the whole paper, and all they do with that is give themselves an overwhelming amount of questions to go back to, but then also they'll start to talk themselves out of answers. So if you feel like you are pretty much 90% with it, then stick with it. You've still got time to go through them. I would only ever flag items that I'm completely not sure of. I've got no clue whatsoever. It could be any of them. Sometimes that comes down to guesswork. And so flagged items, as long as you don't kind of use that tool sparingly. I know we just had a question in terms of rough paper, so I'll get to that and I'll get to the question in a second. But in your actual exam, you are allowed a non-programmable calculator for any of those formula that you might have. And then you're also allowed, as I said, in the exam centre itself, a piece of rough paper. For those of you who are doing maybe IF1 or LM1, where you actually have to know, for example, average formula or contribution questions, what I used to do is when the invigilator tells you you can write on that, if there's anything that I just know is a little bit temperamental in my brain that I'm not going to remember if I get a question on it, I just literally jot it down on that rough paper once the invigilator has said go. And so then I've got it there ready to go as soon as a question comes up in that area. When you're in an exam centre, just note, if any of you, I think quite a few of you are on your dip, so you've done this before, but just remember, not everyone there is doing the same exam as you. So if your neighbour gets up kind of 15 minutes in, don't let that put you off or distract you. I would just say, use your time allowance, your allocated time allowance, as much as you possibly can. So some people will do it in half the time, but I'd recommend to use that time to go back and check the answers before you press submit, because there's nothing worse than getting a fail and thinking, God, if I'd spent 10 more minutes on this, then I could have potentially got a couple more marks. And what I would also say, in terms of the multiple response questions and the case study, any modules that have case studies, I often tell some students that if they tend to get tired or lethargic towards the end of the exam, a lot of these questions start at the end of the actual paper. So for example, in LM2, I think the case studies start at number 55, for example. And so if you do get tired and you feel like you're not going to be able to read that scenario first, at the end, then do those first off and make sure that you can get those out of the way if you like, and then you can go back and check them later on. Good, okay. one last thing before we move on is just actually, I know it sounds patronising, but I've got an example question. Just read the question carefully. So just in terms of some of the, this is my kind of my last slide for the multiple choice aspect, but you can see that this particular question is a bit of a, oh my God, you know, if you saw this straight off, you'd certainly in the high tense exam environment, you'd certainly feel the pressure in terms of getting this particular one right. So read it as carefully as possible, look out for those negative ones and those little kind of weird buzzwords like usually. And so that should hopefully get you through, and try and be as calm and collected as you possibly can. I know it's hard. Hopefully, if any of you are doing the remote invigilation, just being in your own home will put you at ease more than it would if you were in an exam centre. It's a little bit, even though you've got some checks to do, it's a little bit less formal in those terms. Okay, good. So I'm going to move on now to the actual coursework element. And I know a lot of you are keen to hear some of these bits. What I would say is that in terms of coursework, it varies module to module. So I'm going to try and cover as many bases as I can in the time that I've got left. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Sam, do buzz me out if I'm going on too long. But first of all, I want to talk about the diploma and the advanced diploma. So you'll see my little grid that I've made up here. In terms of the actual diploma itself, again, the word count varies from paper to paper. Some of them say maximum 10,000. For example, law says a maximum of 12,000 because you've got a bit more analysis, you've got a bit more debate in there. What I would say, the CII have really cracked down on superseding these word counts recently, and they've actually said we will stop marking it if you have 10% of the actual word allocation over the amount that's allowed. So just do be wary of that. For advanced diploma, it's a little bit more concise, 3,200 per assignment. And as I said, writing too little. So for example, if you were in diploma, you were writing 6,000, that might not be sufficient. If you were in advanced diploma and you wrote maybe 2,500, again, it's not maybe going to be sufficient quality and quantity, if you like, in terms of getting a full answer. The actual format varies as well. So a diploma is essentially 10 questions and they all range from 10 to 30 marks. I'll talk to you more about that in a second. And then the actual advanced diploma is context driven and scenario based, and they're 3 completely unrelated assignments. So I will just mention or touch on something that somebody asked a little bit earlier on. In terms of your context, quite often some of the modules will say, write about a company with which you are familiar with. That should, in theory, be your company. However, if, for example, you're doing the underwriting book, I would probably base your context on an insurer. And if you're doing the broking module, stick to brokerages or broking houses, because it just won't marry up. And so that's quite a key one to consider. In terms of context, I have a little bit of a kind of a checklist, if you like, of what to kind of include. Also, check the specimen for that particular module, because that will give you an idea as well. They should really probably be no more than a kind of a chunky paragraph. Don't eat up your word count with the actual context. But you want to talk about the company. You want to say it's a company that is international. It has branches in various countries. You might want to say which countries or regions they are. You might want to talk a little bit about their values. You also might want to say what the current position is in terms of whatever the book is in relation to, claims or underwriting. And then you might want to say what the future is expected to look like. You are allowed to use the same context for each assignment. So I would probably tweak them according to the assignment, but you are allowed to, in theory, use your same context. You're only plagiarizing yourself, so that's fine. And then in terms of the actual scenario-based ones, they will be broken down into 3 bits. Most of the time it will be an explain, an analyze, and a recommend. And so the scenario-based ones, for example, in some of the strategic modules and so on in advanced diploma, you will have basically a scenario and a made-up company, you know, GBB or whatever else it might be, limited, and you're expected to take that scenario and apply it to 3 questions underneath. I could do a whole session on that alone. However, what I would say is make sure your analysis is the big chunk of it. Don't spend all the time writing your introduction and your explanation. Get to the analysis and make sure that you're kind of providing as much detail as possible. Your recommendations should also be quite concise. So we'll talk more about that in a second. In terms of timing, you've got an 18-month enrolment period for Diploma. So essentially you do your multiple choice and you do your coursework within that time. And for Advanced Diploma, you have 12 months to submit all 3 assignments. You don't have to do these in order, but you have to do one by 6 months, the other by 9 months, and the third and final one by 12 months. The pass marks for each, so you're wanting 60% in Diploma, so 120 out of 200, and for Advanced Diploma, you're wanting 50%, so you need to get 40 marks out of that 80. Okie dokie, let's go on to look at the learning outcomes of the Diploma-based ones. So when you open up your coursework assignment, you will get a grid that looks something like this. Do you remember what I was saying a little bit earlier on about the learning outcomes marrying up with various chapters in the book? So this one I've stolen from Law, so from MO5, and you'll note that each question relates to a particular learning outcome, and then it tells you in the study text where to find those things. Another cheeky little way of making sure that you've covered all that ground, it won't be any chapters outside of these, but you can just do a search and find on your soft copy of any keywords that might be applicable to that particular assignment. You'll start to see that they kind of start off easing you in at 10 marks, 20 marks and so on and so forth. Don't run out of steam before you get to the 30 markers. In fact, I know some people who like to start with the 30 markers so that they know that they've got those under their belts. So bear in mind that these are across more than one chapter. That's where your search and find is going to come in quite handy. So they range 10, 20 and 30. I'm just going to look now at the weighting of Diploma marks. So I've got a little sample question from M92, which will come up shortly. Thank you, Sam. And it is essentially a little tiny scenario. But the thing I want to draw to people's attention is how meticulously the CII make sure that they write these questions. So for example, if it's split down into A, B and C, I'm sorry if this sounds patronising, but make sure you split it down into different sections. Some people just write one whole chunk and it's very hard to determine which aspects that they're talking about. But do you see that they've signposted here the numbers, so 6, 2, 2, for example, and if we take A as an example, we're explaining 6 most important actions, and each of those will be worth 2 marks each because there are 12 marks available in total. So that means you don't have to write one big paragraph for one thing because you're only ever going to get 2 marks for that particular thing. So just make sure you're balancing it accordingly. And what I would do as a check is read through it and say, right, have I made 6 concise points here? Is it enough? Have I written too much? Obviously, normally much is better, but essentially make sure you don't go off on a tangent. But essentially you're trying to fit it into those marks. And then obviously if you look at B and C, again, they're both worth 4 marks each. And so it's 2 things that the CII are looking for. So here you would get 1 mark for the identification of something, and then 1 mark for the actual justification of what you have identified. Just moving on to the weighting of the Advanced Diploma marks. So I've got a little grid here that is available on the CII website as well. The markers will mark based on these 4 quadrants. So knowledge and understanding, application and analysis, coherent structure, and evidence of use in relevant examples. So I would say for Advanced Diploma, if you're allowed or if you can achieve up to 8 marks on an Advanced Diploma paper, you're better off including as many kind of external sources as you possibly can that are relevant. Equally, having a coherent structure is just making sure that you're following through with your thought process on that. You'll see that 50% of the marks available are just down to your analysis, so making sure you've got meaty debates and you're analysing lots of different aspects of what's been asked. And then equally, if you can provide the examiners with your knowledge, so if you're saying, you're talking about a Lloyd syndicate and then you say, well, this has happened recently and there's a new one that's just started up in North American property or whatever else, that will just, obviously if it's relevant, it will just aid the examiner making sure that you've got a really good, vast understanding of the market itself. I'm going to go on to deconstruct the question. So I've just taken a couple of the verbs that you will find at the very back page of all your coursework specimen and also your coursework assignment material. For the diploma ones, you will get a mix of things. You might get a describe, you might get a discuss, or an explain. A lot of them are these bottom two, so identify is quite nice, short and snappy. And explain is something a little bit meatier in terms of justifying what you're talking about. If you are asked to discuss, you're trying to look at kind of areas in detail and weigh up different views based on what you're discussing. And then, as I've mentioned or alluded to already, if you look at that top one, which is analyze, you're looking at those really key things in depth and making sure that you're drawing a connection between what's been asked in the scenario and what your kind of conclusions and recommendations are. Even though the analysis is a part in itself, you're still trying to voice what your opinion is in certain areas. So just make sure that analyze is the key one that you're spending the most time on. Very finally, in this little part, and then I'll answer any other questions that I can see coming through on the chat. Just the very final slide just looks at this referencing aspect. The CII do prefer Harvard style, and what that essentially is the surname of the author of the resource that you've used, and typically the year that it's published. You can put in the title and the page number, but if you don't want to eat up your word count, you're welcome to put the two main parts in the body of your text and then bring the rest of it down into the referencing section. So that is sometimes what people do, just make sure it's clear which one that you're referring to in the referencing section. So I've taken, for example, the insurance law. It's by a chap called Chris Parsons. So he is the author. That is the study text, whatever the syllabus year is, and then whichever page that you got that from initially is always a really good indication for the examiner. You are not advised to use more than 30% quotes. So I would say keep your quotes to the point and keep them snappy. So don't use kind of paragraphs of quotes, just go for the really kind of the bits that are required. And in terms of referencing websites, just here I've given you a kind of a brief example. You can put the whole website address in it, and most people will just put underneath, I accessed this on the 1st of July. So it means if the examiner actually clicks on that link and it doesn't exist anymore, we know that you've done it in the past and you've looked at it previously. So they're the key aspects of referencing. And just remember, in terms of more so at advanced diploma level than diploma, it's obviously both relevant in both kind of levels, but I would say at advanced, that's when the key kind of things need to come out in terms of the external reading and the resources. So that is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of the approach to coursework. Sam, is there any questions that
yeah, I'll just get you to look through the chat over. We've had a few conversations going on to have a look at. Melissa's asked a question around word count and how to keep out the questions in it, which my suggestion would be check the amount of words in the questions first and then reduce that every time you've got the amount, but you might have a better answer for that one actually. So I'll let you have a look at those questions now.
Yeah.
And then I'll come on to this slide if you want to go back to them in the chat.
Lovely. Okay.
Cool. Okay, so what we'll look at here is our pathway. So be useful just for me to know if anyone has got any specific questions. It tends to get a little bit more specific as we start looking at this. I'm going to just pick out some of the general rules, the most useful shortcuts, and also some of the common mistakes we see from people as well. So there is a bit of a key difference with certificate. If you're in the London market, it makes sense for you to do the LM exam, so LM1, LM2 and LM3. They do complement each other really well. For that, I also recommend people sit them quite closely together, because you'll find that whatever you've learned for LM1 will help you in the LM2, which will help you in the LM3. The long gaps actually just increases your forgetting period of time for you to have to relearn things. So do try and go through those ones at a quicker pace if you're looking at those exams. Alternatively, if you're looking at IF exams, I know Grace and I are in agreement that the ones to focus on, of course, IF1. IF3 is a really nice one to setting you up for the later diploma exams. and then the IF that's best suited for your job. So usually IF4 for claims, or maybe a broken, whatever's best suited for you. And then once we've got that certificate one, MO5, the one everybody has to do, that really isn't as bad as its reputation. We've got some tips for that on our website as well. But then M92, business and finance. Quite often hear people who either have an exemption from a business degree, so they have 530 advanced diploma level, or they prefer the coursework option, so moving on to do 530 and saying they don't need to do M92. What I really suggest is, if you've got that prior knowledge from a degree, do M92. It will really help you. Assuming those credits haven't already been assigned to you, you'll get the credits for both, and you'll find it's a little bit of prior learning that will make that module feel a lot more at home for you, depending on what you've already learned around it in the past. So MO5 and M92, you can do M92 and 530. So if you enjoy doing the M92 module and you're trying to pick which advanced diploma modules are best for you, then have a look at 530 as well, because you can do both. It's not a matter of either or. You then need to go on to do 2 more diploma ones, or get your points from the higher level, so the advanced level. Advanced level means it's all coursework. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's any harder, it's just a different type of learning. So once we get to the advanced diploma, the CII are checking your understanding and your application of knowledge. So it's about taking those questions and applying them to more real life scenarios. So I really recommend moving up and going and completing some coursework modules. And then as you get further along and you've completed all the coursework modules that you need to for advanced diploma, by this point, you'll probably know quite clearly whether you'd prefer do more exams or more coursework. So if you've got to do 5 coursework modules, you've got 3 essays for each. There's 15 essays. As much as you don't like exams, there's only so many essays you can do before you probably want to break from them. So go on to do the advanced diploma, and then just come backwards and go down to diploma to fill out some more exams if you do feel that you prefer alternate between them. You've got your compulsory unit, so advanced underwriting, advanced claims, or advanced broken. Again, you can do all of these if you want to. And then after that, I think it's really about picking the modules that you enjoy the most. So which ones do you find interesting? Ones that I find really interesting, 990, 945, so marketing, corporate management, so the more strategic roles where you get to kind of think bigger picture around the organisation, because they don't really come up in any of the diploma modules. So I found those were a little bit refreshing and something new to be doing. Now, once you've got all of these credits at advanced diploma, you'll have some more credits to make up. So you have your 205 credits at diploma level or above, 150 credits at advanced diploma. The rest of your credits, you can go right back to your certificate level and claim the rest of your points from those exams. So once you have got towards the end, quite a nice exercise to just once every couple of months complete an additional IF exam as you're submitting that coursework or waiting for those results to come back. So that way you've got all of those credits ready. So by the time you've got your final piece of coursework marked and returned, that's you completed and you've got your ACII. Now with this, we do have a spreadsheet. We'll email you all around after this session, and we'll give you this spreadsheet which you can complete all of the exams that you're doing or you're planning to do, and it will work out the credits for you so you can see whether you've ticked off enough credits for each level. And you can also put in some different options to see what your alternative ideas might be and how those might work. I'm just going to check in the Q&A if anyone's got any more specific questions on this one. Look, okay, so that coursework in the chat. See where everyone is. Okay, so yeah.
Up with the chat now. So there's a couple of things I will just quickly address, if that's okay, Sam.
Yeah.
So I agree with Sam's answer about Cherie talking about the 50 words per mark. I wouldn't do it per mark. I would just say, as you say, looking at those verbs that they use, if it's an analyze, it will be much bigger than an identify. So don't worry too much about making it word for word, 50 words per mark. And in terms of Melissa's question, just as a quick, so you can either show your word count and then deduct what the original kind of spiel is that they give you at the top, saying Arial font, size 11, da, 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 da. You can get rid of that. Or what I used to do, and because I was absolutely mortified of ever losing my coursework, so I did used to do it in a separate Word document, as a couple of you have said, and then I used to copy and paste it into the template when it was ready to submit, and that's how I knew that everything was all okay, and I could check the word count and put it in the little box at the top based on that. So that is a key thing. Zach, I'm going to come back to you on email because I know that you've answered me with this, but in terms of case law, I would just reference a case. So for example, you might, if in law you're talking about the Alcock and Chief Constable of Yorkshire case, I would just say Alcock with a little star next to it. And then in the referencing, I would put the full case, including all the dates and everything else that's given, and so that they know which case that you're referring to there. And just whilst I remember it, guys, just make sure that, especially in this virtual world, hence the name of the webinar, that you're not showing your coursework to anybody. The rule still applies, so make sure you don't email anybody, make sure you don't get anyone to put tracked changes on it. You shouldn't be showing it to anybody because the CII are getting really serious in terms of plagiarism, and they also have a lot of software that picks this up as well. So that's just the only other bits and pieces that I wanted to flag.
Okay, anyone got any additional questions? You can go, we've got 3 minutes, so you can go outside of what we've been covering here. If you've got any, chuck them into the chat now. We're going to stay on as well. I know people generally are in back-to-back calls in this virtual world, so if you do have to dash off, that's no problem. If you do want to hold on, then please do stay as we cover the rest of the questions.
Okay.
Cherry, if you go in on the booking your exam and then going into a test centre and put your postcode in, it will show you what's available around you, if that's close to your home. However, if you used to sit exams in London and maybe you don't live in London, then you can put in the postcode or just put in London and see what comes up in that range as well. So generally speaking, there's a handful of them open. The ones in central London aren't open, the ones around are, so Watford, Croydon, so on seem to be starting to open up now, but they are all opening up bit by bit now, so it will be changing every week. I will keep an eye on that. Oh, if your exam's already booked, then and you've booked it recently, it should be open. If you booked this months ago, then contact the inquiries line and just double check that it is still open.
Okay, Zara's question. So do I need to paraphrase when talking about sections of the legislation acts? What I would say is to avoid eating up your word count, take the really concise bit of the legislation if you're referring to it, so it might be like a one-liner. If not, you are welcome to paraphrase, but then maybe you might want to reference below, again, where you got it in the book or where you got it from the legislation.gov website or whatever else that might be. So that's fine. Heidi, in terms of recording, we are going to make one available. So we'll give you the details for that shortly. And I haven't read Monet's, so I'll just do that quickly. In terms of if you're struggling to find an answer in a CII book, sometimes they expect you to think a little bit outside of the book. So don't worry if it's not word for word there. They just want you to use a little bit more kind of research materials perhaps. And so don't be worried if it's just a paragraph and they're expecting you to expand on that. I know a couple of assignments whereby they're asking about very specific things, but they want people to go away and do that external reading. So I would say use your soft copy and we'll go from there. Okay. Should we, we'll just take any last questions. If we haven't answered your questions, then I will, we'll do so afterwards. But if we sign off now, thank you very much, everybody, for attending on this lovely sunny afternoon. And it was I was really pleased with the turnout. So thank you very much for giving your time. I hope it was useful.
Melissa, a useful website for referencing correctly. There's two things. The CII have got some really detailed instructions on this, but also when you're in Word, there is a referencing tool you can actually use to include in your Word. I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, but we're going to send around an email with some helpful information after this. I'll include that in there as well, and that actually helps you record it and organise it nicely so it's all ready for you at the end of your courseworks.
Wonderful. Okie dokie.
Good to see you, Sam.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. And then anyone who wants to stick around, then please do.
No. Okay. Stop sharing the slides now.